So what's cooking there? You look at this picture, you see the three leaders at something is cooking behind?
Listen, it was a weird event. I think your reaction when this broke, Jacob, is the same as mine. There are things going on around this event that we just don't know what they are. And Ehud Yaari, a respected Israeli journalist, veteran Israeli journalist with Channel 12 News, their Arab affairs correspondent, been a huge fan of his for a long time, in a radio interview this morning here in Israel, basically said as much. It is highly unusual, never has happened, that an Israeli prime minister is publicly slapped over in an Egyptian city. This was an event, even to take a step back, a meeting that had not been announced publicly, that was in some sense revealed against the wishes of at least some of the participants. Didn't seem to be an urgent reason why these three needed to meet each other face to face, let alone have the Israeli prime minister stay overnight. So of course the question on all of our minds, is there someone who's there that we don't know about? Particularly Mr. Mohammad bin Salman from Saudi Arabia. Is he there that we don't know about? Is there some breakthrough that's about to happen with Saudi Arabia? There was no public breakthrough, as we now know. But of course, was asked in that interview, and Ehud Yaari said he didn't know. Unclear whether he really didn't know, as he insisted, or if he was being coy. But in any event, there are elements of that meeting that simply don't compute, leading, I think, all of us to believe that there are things about it that we don't know, and it's going to be interesting to see in the next few weeks if they come out.
For example, the Syrian card.
Right, and that was another thing that that Ehud Yaari was asked about in that interview. Is it the case that the Emiratis are trying to mediate, as strange as it may seem, to mediate between Israel and Syria, between the Israeli government and Bashar al-Assad, and even, Jacob, even more strange, with Hezbollah in Lebanon? The Emiratis, according to Ehud Yaari, are interested in playing a mediating role between the two sides. From their perspective, the shoe fits. It makes sense. You know, Jake, we always think about the UAE taking Israel's side against the Iran nuclear deal, for example, and a position against Iran. We forget that the main enemy, if you will, or the main regional rival from the UAE's perspective is not Iran, but it's the Muslim Brotherhood. Again, explaining their closeness with Sisi in Egypt, for whom the Muslim Brotherhood is a sworn enemy. And they at times have done business literally and figuratively with Iran, have even reached out to Iran. So the idea of them trying to bridge the gaps between Israel and Syria and even Hezbollah is not that far-fetched. Of course, the real question is, could a mediation like that have any real chances of succeeding? Is there any kind of zone of possible agreement? Does Bashar al-Assad, even if he wanted to come to some kind of rapprochement with Israel, does he have the space to do so, given his commitments to Iran, in some sense his commitments to Russia, and the presence on his territory of groups he can't control, of Hezbollah agents and others? So it's a lot more complicated than the Emiratis may want to believe.
Right. We should mention that Assad was in the UAE.
That's right. You're absolutely right. So they are openly courting him. What's unclear is whether they are interested in any kind of mediation between him and Israel, and what kind of prospects that kind of mediation would have.
What about why I asked Dr. Maziad before about forming a sort of united front in the region?
If you look at the dots in this region, Jacob, they seem to connect and start the beginnings of painting some kind of portrait like that. Just again, to take a step back, if you look at other parts of the world, there are strong regional governance organizations. Of course, the EU in Europe, there's the African Union in Africa, ASEAN in Southeast Asia, and other groups, albeit weaker, like the Organization of American States in the Americas. Here in the Middle East, of course, we have the GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council, which is quite a strong body. There's also the Arab League, which is less so. But we don't really have a strong regional governance organization that would bring in a diverse set of parties together. But you can see the beginnings, particularly in the Eastern Mediterranean, right? Don't forget the European Union started out as the coal and steel community, right? Only on those two commodities, and then evolved into something much greater. Could something similar happen with gas in the Eastern Mediterranean, where there already is an institution, a gas forum, that brings together Egypt, Israel, Greece, Cyprus, the UAE, at least as an observer state, and maybe Turkey in some constellation joining over time? And then the Saudis setting up a kind of Red Sea governance organization with the littoral states in the Red Sea. Israel not a part of it at this point, again, as Ehud Yaari made note of in that interview. But could that become some kind of regional governance organization that could bring these groups together and take on security issues, as is already happening in the Eastern Mediterranean? Something for us really to be watching over the medium to long term, and could be a very, very interesting dynamic as we watch the geopolitics of this region start to take shape.
It's getting interesting in the Middle East.
It always is.
Now.
Now, even more so.
Owen Alterman, thank you very much.